"Bring me," said Professor Oswald Sabin, but he got no further. The deep, orotund voice, which held no hint of age, Dora reflected that its vibrant, organ-like music had been one of the factors that had brought her under his tremendous spell and bound their lives together, was cut off sharp and sheer as by a switch. As she turned on her high heel, she saw what she knew she would see, the magnificent head tossing upon the pillow, the high forehead purple with congestion, the dark brown eyes rolling, the bleached hand with the long fingers, like those of a master pianist, trembling upon the coverlet of the bed. Paralysis had seized him again, had blasted his tongue, had snared up his throat. Had it petrified his fingers this time? The young wife handed her husband pen and pencil. The dynamic will of the man commanded the flesh to obey, but every finger rebelled. There was a twitching, nothing more, but she knew the routine. "Your manuscript?" she asked. "No," replied the large, lustrous eyes. "Sir Thomas Browne, the Religio Medici, was one of his favorite books." "No." "Pater's Renaissance?" "No." "Mark Twain, his last philosophic?" "No." Perhaps he wanted the plans of the tower, the mysterious tower, the secret of which he had never confided to her. There it stood on the hillock above the house, dominating Cheriton. Through the square frames of the cross-mullioned sash she saw it clearly against the clump of pines, four-square, brutal, ominous. It was like the turret of an old town wall, a hollow shaft lifting its round metallic top to heaven. 4 bosses of polished bronze were built into the stones of each side, like embedded cannonballs. A low copper dome was visible above the walls. The plans of the tower lay in a large portfolio of pigskin, locked, the key on a silk cord around his neck. "The plans?" she faltered. At times he was so remote, not only in age and genius, that he no longer seemed to be her husband, but only the great man, one of humanity's heroes, a fragment of the age, of history. His eyes shone, but the lid twitched in the negative that she understood. She suggested a dozen further alternatives, but without success. His muscular, well-knit frame seemed to dilate. The blue veins on the noble forehead swelled. The eyes sparkled as if cut in facets. The great man had become the great child. That luminous brain, which had helped to change the face of the world and the course of civilization, was battling to break through the barriers of the incommunicable, to triumph over matter, but it remained earth-bound and mute. Thought, will, and desire were shut up in the dungeon of the paralyzed body. He had invented instruments and apparatus that were almost human, more than human, in the radius and reach of sensitive response and mechanical perception. They talked and ticked and registered, almost sentient creatures, all over the world at this very moment. Yet here their creator lay helpless. Pity, fear, yes, a kind of horror, overcame her. If only it were over, she thought. She had learned now that veneration, respect, devotion could not take the place of love. Then conscience, old religious scruples, snapped up like toothed traps hidden in the grass of the days and caught at her feet. Civilization, marriage, domesticity, the aura of his fame in which she lived, all vanished. Helpless male and weak female, they faced each other like two sphinxes of stone. A gulf lay between them, and in the crevasse, deep down, ran the roaring stream of life, divided and at different levels. Concentrated fury now sparkled from the eyes of her husband. They were all that lived, yet they lived terribly. Their hatred, she knew, was bent not against her, but against fate. 2 tears rolled down the flushed, hanging flesh of his cheeks. Should she send for Hubert Aspinwall, his assistant, his disciple? No, not him. She could not bear to see this ordeal, and went out. As the door closed behind her, she felt 2 tears roll down her own smooth cheeks. She cast a glance at a mirror in the corridor. She looked pale, she thought, and careworn. Had her husband noticed it? No. Had Hubert Aspinwall noticed it? Would he notice it? She drew a letter from her pocket and read it. Her face glowed. The life forces were suddenly augmented through her entire being. She kissed the signature, a large S.W. A smile, deep and inscrutable as that of Eve, played about her lips and belied the nun-like coiffure of her dark hair. The morning of the second day after this seizure saw Oswald Sabin partially restored. He was now eager to rise, but Thora forbade it. She said to herself, laying a comfortable unction to her questioning heart, "It is best for him." Then she asked herself the question which she hoped would drive out self-reproach. Am I not solicitous for his welfare? Am I not? To her husband she said, "What is it you wanted, Oswald?" A smile spread over his face. It was that sweet, shining smile that made the austere face, in its frame of long hair, almost boyish. The ice that had bound his arms and fingers was gone. He waved his hands in the air and snapped his fingers. "It is the acme of atrocious, dear," said he. "Think of it. I who have enabled journalists, politicians, stock jobbers, and lovers to see and jabber with one another simultaneously and at a dozen spots between New York and Melbourne, and have thereby advanced civilization a full half-inch, could not find a way to tell you that I wanted you to take down that fiddle on the wall." She took it down and pressed it into his hands. "And then the bow. And now a sheet of Bristol board from the drafting room, and some fine sand. That from the broken hourglass will do." She brought him all these. As he dallied gracefully with fiddle and bow, he reminded her of some great maestro. His silver mane was like that of Liszt. "The time has come, Thora," he said with a mellow gravity, "for you to know about—" A fit of coughing seized him. His neck and forehead reddened. Great God, what if another stroke? "Yes," she said tensely. "Yes." He recovered himself slowly. The words writhed out between the strong, slightly yellowed teeth. "The tower." At last! One of the shadows, the secrets that had laid between them, was about to pass. She knew by every tiny fibre of her woman's instinct that this strange structure of stone was not to be devoted to science alone, that in some way it was bound up with his destiny and hers. "The tower," he went on, pointing in its direction with the bow, "is not only an observation point, a nucleus of forces. It is a musical instrument." "A musical instrument?" "It is a harp." "What?" "An Aeolian harp." "I do not understand," she said. "You shall. But it is also a home." "A home?" "A habitation, for someone to live there after." "After?" "After he is dead. Yes, it is a tomb, a mausoleum." "For whom?" "For me. First for me, then perhaps for you." She was silent. Cold settled over her soul. That perhaps had given her heart a wrench. But the letter in her bosom was there. A heart seemed to beat out of it against hers. "You know the conditions of our living together and of our dying alone." "Yes," she said. I'll keep them." "You have known only a part of them, dear. The part connected with dying, my dying. You know," he went on, "I've tried to teach men to regard both living and dying as a seemly feast. It was easy to teach the joy of life, even with all its concomitants of pain. But who would believe that the end of living might also involve a kind of rapture, deep, still, serene. It was necessary to teach that, far more necessary than the other. It was not easy. It is perhaps only for the elect. To most men, growing old may be like growing poor. I have grown rich with the treasures of life, but I feel that I am also weak, that I must keep on bringing up this great truth now that I must soon put it to the test. The Socratic passing, that is the secret. But in spite of my regret at leaving life, above all leaving you, dearest, he caught her hand, kissed it, and fondled it, I know I shall play the end as I intended. You know it, and therefore you will, she faltered. My going is cheered by the thought that it will mean liberation for you, that you will be happy with my pupil, my heir, the man I love above all others, Hubert Aspinwall. He alone can carry on and complete my work. My work must go on. You must help him. The sick man was silent for a moment, then resumed. I, too, shall live on, as dust lives. She thought of his rationalism, crystal cold, yet always bound up with a kind of high poetry and religious feeling. As dust lives and is full of joy. See here. He smoothed the sand upon the paper and held the violin above it, upside down. He then drew the bow sharply across the strings, tearing a long, deep, tremulous note from them. The sand trembled and danced. It rushed together in drifts and lines, and thickened and thinned in spirals that opened and closed, ebbed and flowed. He changed the note, and the fine yellow sand took still other shapes and forms. Thora stared, uncomprehending. Suppose, Thora, that this dust were human. Oh, what an idea! It is an idea full of immensities. I, the austere, stoic man of science, will give the world a last gift before I die, a new beauty, a new expression for life, for death, a symbol for immortality. I shall continue to live, for motion is life. In the sense of science, I shall continue to preach, to teach. He smiled his bitter, sweet, ironic smile. To sing. Even pilgrims may come to Sheralton, to this house. The Sabin Museum, to my tower. He sat sunk in silence, like a king brooding upon eternity. Her voice seemed harsh, like the everyday things of the world. And yet, Oswald, I do not understand. The tower over there, he resumed, is like this violin. It is really a huge harp, an Aeolian harp, built to last, of tempered bands and tuned chords of copper, phosphor, bronze, iron, silver, and strips of thin gold. All are delicately attuned according to my principles. In the copper hood of the tower are 4 openings, air gates, at present sealed up. They face north, east, south, and west. These mouths open into tubes and cylinders. Embedded under the chords of the great wind harp is a vibrant plate, a tympanum as sensitive as a seismograph. On the west side of the tower, near the top, there is a loose stone. After I am dead, or, let us say, after these paralytic nerves and muscles and bones have been refined into a canister full of thin, crisp dust and ashes, pulvis et sinis, this stone is to be removed, the ashes poured in, and the stone cemented into place. A great happiness beamed from his eyes. His face was irradiated as she had always seen it when some great discovery of his was perfected. He went on, and ecstasy lighted in him, as from some iridescent core within. His voice rang distant and detached, as if it were already proceeding from the tower, as if he were addressing multitudes that stood below. He saw them, the generations, the ant-hills of humanity for which he had labored and suffered and dreamed, and which, unlike the sand upon the paper before him. When the winds blow, I shall be with you all. With every one of the 4 winds I shall speak differently to you, running the whole gamut of life and all the emotions that range between joy and grief, between love and hate. the eternal attraction, the eternal repulsion, which is life and change. The dust that was Oswald Sabin shall continue to live, to leap, to dance, now to a zephyr, now to a hurricane, for years, for decades, for centuries. Thus I shall continue to be active in the universe, in the eternal dance of the atoms. My whole being shall be thrilled with the fresh, pure breath of the winds of the world. I shall hear and feel and smell and taste the earth, the air. Professor Oswald Sabin died 3 weeks later. For several weeks he lived again in the press of every land, in memorial services in every tongue, in the magnetic blood of the almost superhuman instruments he had invented. After the cremation, the stone in the tower was removed. Only the window and Hubert Aspinwall stood on the tower. Thora lifted the copper canister with the thin ashes, but her hands shook. The canister almost fell from her clasp. Aspinwall took the container and poured in the grey mass. A thin musical tinkling and rustling came from within, as if a legion of mice were scrambling along tubes of glass. Aspinwall, dressed in black from head to foot, pressed the hand of the widow, but she withdrew it quickly and ran down the circular iron staircase, then down the hill to the house. Aspinwall leaned over the parapet and watched her. He knew then that one of the burning desires of his master would never be carried out. The soul of Thora Sabin, freed from the bands that had bound it, half in reverence, half in a sort of daughterly love, to the great man, now reached forth for a warmer, more passionate life, a life of which she had dreamed as a wider existence. She, the incarnation of smoldering impulses and yearnings, of lover-like yet maternal instincts, was never intended to be a scientist's wife. She hated science. She feared Hubert Aspinwall, who was a scientist, and a priestly scientist, in every fibre of his nature. He was bound by a pledge which she knew he would keep, to carry out the uncompleted work of Oswald Sabin, the master whom he adored, the task to which he was consecrated. After a few attempts to win Thora, soul-searing encounters in which her aversion to him accentuated itself to a glow of hatred that left him dumb, Aspinwall gave up all hope. He left in despair, taking Sabin's papers with him, among them the plans of the tower, and removed the entire laboratory to a neighboring villa. The tower, strangely enough, remained mute to all winds. Aspinwall alone knew why. After a year, Thora Sabin married Sanders Wright, an old schoolmate of hers. He was a laughing bon vivant, a loose, debonair devil. She scarcely recognized the man whom she had once known and loved, and who had written her such moving letters from abroad. Wright scoffed at the idea of converting the mansion into a Sabin museum of science. It began to blaze, from basement to attic, night after night. The garden broke into a revel of Japanese lanterns. Music came from the grounds. Dancing forms swept past the windows. Mrs. Wright and her husband were burning life at both ends. The professor's fortune furnished candles and matches. Aspinwall, a heavy-hearted recluse, sat in his laboratory, communing with the spirit of his great teacher, agonizing over the solution of the problems left him as a legacy. "What's this big metal band?" asked Sanders Wright one day. He had encountered a flat strip of copper, half an inch thick and 2 inches broad, which ran through a closed closet off the hall. It seemed to pierce the house from top to bottom. "I don't know," said Thora. "It has something to do with the lightning rod, I believe." The first indication of a voice from the fourth dimension was recorded by the telephone instruments of Sheraton. There was a strange, unusual vibration in the earpieces, an almost eerie ringing, higher than the human register. The center of the disturbance was traced to a telephone pole in close proximity to the tower. Aspinwall advised the removal of the pole to another position, and the disturbance ceased. But why was the tower dumb? Why did the Aeolian mechanism fail to operate? Could Sabin have made a miscalculation? People said that his widow still held the key which would release the voice of the harp, but Wright had forbidden its use. In a fit of retrospective jealousy, he had even caused her to destroy all that still linked her life or her memories with Professor Sabin. Aspinwall was working out mysterious formulas. Wright made threats. If the infernal tower should begin to give voice, he would blow it up with dynamite. Spookish myths began to spread about Sheraton. Someone who had been in the grounds one night had put his ear to the stone and had heard strange murmurs and tickings within. Another said that the copper bosses that stood out like angry carbuncles on the four sides of the tower, powerful electrodes or poles, had glowed with a purplish fluorescence. Aspinwall remained buried in his laboratory. At times, but always at night, he emerged, dressed in overalls like a workman, his hands and his face shining with a thin coat of greenish grime. Some tremendous experiment was under way. Forces were being marshaled for some battle between occult and material powers. Meanwhile, the big house continued to ring with revelry. Strange, dissipated creatures, Wright's former cronies, came in motor cars from the metropolis. Thora Wright, whose beauty had taken on a challenging and perilous cast, often galloped forth in a mannish riding costume on a cream-colored horse. Then, one night, a warm summer's night, the tower began to speak. It was actually more like human speech than mechanical music. It was more like a song than speech. Its unearthly melody, its compelling sorcery, went forth wonderfully into the night. It invaded the windows of Thora Wright's rooms, her ears, her whole soul. She arose, trembling. His voice. It was persuasive, sweet, full of that irresistible, moving magic which he had been able to impart to it, even as an old man. It was the voice with which, invested with the halo of his fame, he had wooed and won her. She thrust her feet into her slippers, stole past Sanders Wright, who was dozing sottishly on the sofa in the library, went out into the warm air, and crept to the tower. His dust, the dust that had loved her, was dancing within, under the impulse of that mild breeze. The trees rustled. The whole earth seemed warm. He was living again, speaking in the wind. What message lay in this music, metallic, yet full of superhuman sweetness? Was it a complaint, an accusation, or a lament? She seemed somehow to feel the presence of Hubert Aspinwall, his voice mingling with that of her dead husband. A light was burning in the turret room of the scientist's laboratory. One moonlit night, when Sanders Wright was smoking in his garden, he saw Dr. Aspinwall come out of the tower and lock the ponderous steel door, as thick as that of a treasury vault. He ran and caught the frail scientist by the neck. "You sneaking whelp, creeping around here like a thief," he bellowed. "I'll teach you." Aspinwall turned and grappled with him. "I'm here by authority of Professor Sabin, as you know," he said. "Sabin's dead and gone to hell," shouted Wright. "Dead men have no authority here." He struck Aspinwall full in the face. Blood flowed down the scientist's pale, scholarly cheek. His thin figure trembled. His dark eyes blazed. He choked. Then he wrestled himself free. "The next time I'll kill you, like a burglar," snarled Wright. "Get out." "You will hear from us both," said Aspinwall at last, in a voice that seemed to come ventriloquistically from his inmost depths. His lips, dark with blood, were motionless. He turned and went. 2 nights afterwards, the heavens were broken up. The clouds were balled and battered together by a fierce norther. In the intervals of the howling hurricane and the booming thunder, the voice of the tower was heard, a deep, sonorous music, hard, prophetic, oracular, a sound as of spheres of ice and iron ricocheting across the firmamental plateaus, as of a titanic foghorn blowing from both poles, an august and awful symphony. The whole house vibrated with it, a ball of flame, like St. Martin's fire upon mastheads at sea, played about the glittering point of the lightning rod and the 4 bronze bosses. "It is his voice!" cried Thora. There was no escape from the tremendous tumult of the tones. She ran in terror to the tiny closet off the corridor, to bury her head in the rugs and curtains stored there. The dust of the dead man was convulsed by the storm. Every atom of that great mind was dancing to the stupendous orchestra. Nay, she had the feeling that he was leading it, that this pile of ashes was the true heart of the tempest. The whole house sang and vibrated like telegraph wires in the wind. The copper band that had passed through the closet thrilled like a gigantic tuning fork. It seemed to grow warm to her hand. After this she almost yielded to Wright's persistent demands that she should sell the house and let him invest the money. There were offers for the property, but in this, at least, she resolved to be true to her trust. The tower and the house were now elevated by the population of Sherrilton to the distinction of being veritably haunted. The offers from would-be purchasers ceased. The parties ceased too, and the dances. Sometimes cries and loud quarrelings were heard. People said that Wright had gone from bad to worse, that he was drinking desperately and even beating his wife. The tower had become a wonder and a mystery. Often, when the soft winds from the south poured themselves into the wide copper throat that gaped toward the point of the heavens, a wonderful music streamed forth over the landscape and the town, and everyone paused to listen. Unutterable yearning, love, rapture, a golden sensuousness that tore at every nerve of joy, flooded the air like amber. Women and girls felt their hearts melt within them, and the men they loved found them without will in this hour. Then again, a boisterous west wind, tearing in from the sea, would set the chords ringing. The soft notes became brazen trumpet choruses, goads to the blood, calls to adventure, clarion challenges cascading down from the blue dome or darting from the steel eyes of the stars. Men felt a strange spirit of daring, a hatred of home and women, a call as of deserts, mountain peaks, boundless plains, and dark forests, a summons to war and battle. When the wind was from the east, and strong enough, the chanting tower sang a high, thin note, an austere, cold, glass-like music, devoid of all earthly resonance or echo, a crystalline symphony in the upper registers. It turned one's thoughts to eternal things, to religions, ascetic philosophies, Uranian and utopian yearnings and aspirations that transcended flesh and fire. When the northers raged, the tower's notes became like iron, deep bass sounds, as of the pipes of a great organ rolling forth a sonorous threnody, a paean of death, a black, majestic music that drove gloom into every heart. When weddings or festivals were to take place at Sherrilton, the first question was whether the wind might blow from the north on that day. What was most remarkable, however, was the fact that the voice in the tower was often audible, and powerfully audible, to the denizens of the mansion, when it was silent to all others. One could step out of the zone of clamorous sound about the house into an area where, save for a low humming, stillness reigned. What did this mean? Wright said that it was due to Aspinwall's infernal jugglery. "I do for the dog, and the tower, too," he cried. One Monday afternoon Wright came back from the city with a number of big dynamite cartridges. These he showed to a crony of his, then stored them in his room. A great terror came upon Thora. What should she do? Should she flee from her home? On Friday night she was roused out of sleep by a tempest of sound. A storm was roaring through the trees without. Thunder growled, and rain swashed in sheets against the windows. The tower was sending abroad a stupendous uproar of long-drawn, snoring notes, a threatening thunder, as of some prophet invoking doom upon the world, harsh iron tones of judgment, death, and destruction. Again she heard his voice in it, Oswald Sabin's, a voice full of anger, horror, and denunciation. She leaped from bed and hastily slipped on shoes and a coat. A light shone from her husband's room. With horror in her heart, she saw him at work, preparing the dynamite cartridges. His eyes were lighted evilly, his face a mask of malice, his lips thin and sinister. She entered the room. "For God's sake!" A sudden shock, a loud curse, an overturned chair, cries, shrieks, the sound of a falling body. A little later that night Hubert Aspinwall, active amid the instruments in his lonely laboratory, his ears full of the planetary music of the tower, seemed to hear his name called in a terrible voice that pierced compellingly through all the plangent, ringing chords. "Dr. Aspinwall, Hubert, Hubert." He hurried down, an electric torch in his hand. Thora stood before the door in the nimbus of the light, her hair and face wet with the rain. A red smear ran across her chin from her upper lip, which was split and swollen. One of her eyes seemed contused and bloodshot. "Mrs. Sabin!" he cried, remembering her only by that name. "Thora, your lips, what—" "He struck me," she said listlessly. Then she seized Aspinwall's arm and cried, "He's going to blow up the tower. He's preparing the dynamite in his room." "Sit here," Hubert ordered abruptly, and pushed her down upon an old sofa in the porch. He then ran upstairs to his laboratory. The storm increased. The skies opened in blinding rifts. The thunder seemed a part of the grandiose orchestra, overtopped by the clearer, higher symphony of the tower. The music became like a knell, as of countless church bells tolling, as of a chorus sung by an innumerable multitude of the damned, mingled with a high, accusatory voice, as of some god pronouncing judgment. To Thora, afterward, it seemed as if she were present at a conclave of powers debating upon the birth of a new world. Overhead she heard the snapping of sparks and the humming and thrilling notes of mysterious instruments. The tower, lifting darkly against the shifting clouds, became a center of terrible energies. It stood outlined with a glow of violet rose, and the bronze bosses shone like iron heated to a cherry red. Or was it only her poor, throbbing eyes that saw it thus? An eerie, many-stranded rope of twitching phosphorescence began to play between the bosses in the tower and the lightning rod upon the roof of the house. The flat dome gleamed magically, growing whiter and whiter. An oppressive heat filled the air, an indescribable tension that made the eardrums ring. There was a chaos of light and sound in choking metallic fumes. Her senses reeled, and a great swoon seemed to come over the world. Over all she heard the clamor of the singing tower, charged with unimaginable, mysterious potencies, the voice of Oswald Sabin chanting an apocalyptic doom from the skies. Suddenly the dark bulk of the house parted like a riven wall. A bar of vertical light seemed to cleave it asunder like a sword. An enormous flame bloomed out of one of the collapsing halves. Then came a crash as of worlds in ruin, and a rain of glass fell about her like the fragments of her shattered life. She knew nothing more. until Hubert Aspinwall raised her and led her out into the open. Where the house had stood there was only a tall, livid rod, gleaming with a violet radiance in the night, and humming like an enormous tuning fork. The storm still raged, but from the tower there now came a soft, enchanting music, a note of peace and happiness, a paean of joy and release. "It is his will," said Aspinwall defiantly, yet solemnly, as he led her down to the high road. "It is my will," he added, as they hurried down toward Shelton. "And mine," she whispered, as she laid her hand in his.